she knows better than I do. So, I mean, that's the best part about this, is it's not somebody who I have to explain anything to. You know, I mean, I've worked with Kathy for so many years. I mean, it is, well, at least like 35 years. And, you know, in close producing together, just working together, and as friends, and, you know, it's a great relationship. He actually has all the qualities that are necessary to run a company like this.
What advice do you have for Kathy?
Good luck. Good luck. Good luck.
You know, something's always confused me about the Kathleen Kennedy Star Wars thing. There's always just been this one lingering question the whole time for me, and it's, why did George pick her? Because George picked her, you know what I mean? Like, she was handpicked by George. You actually, like, know the lore of Kathleen Kennedy. She's like, you know, the story's weird because it's like she's this super competent, really awesome producer lady that George Lucas handpicks, and then it's like at the top of her height of her power, so to speak, she goes dark side. A lot of us just thought, well, that's what's going on with Kathleen Kennedy, and that's why, you know, so many of us went so hard on her. You probably already know what this is about, but in case the clickbait got you and you're not quite sure the context, there's some crazy information out there now about Kathleen Kennedy, Star Wars, Bob Iger. And this all really began with Adam Driver doing an interview with the AP where he discusses a Star Wars movie that he had been trying to get off the ground for multiple years called The Hunt for Ben Solo. This is a film that was going to be directed by Steven Soderbergh, who, by the way, actually commented on this. It's very rare that people involved in this kind of a story would actually comment on it. Soderbergh literally said something like, I very much enjoyed making that movie in my head, and I'm just sorry the fans will never get to see it. And that's like, it's wild. But what it resulted in was the uncovering of a lot of truths, or at least potential truths, about what's actually been going on with Star Wars. Because Adam Driver very specifically says Kathleen Kennedy, Carrie Beck, and Dave Filoni were all on board with this film, The Hunt for Ben Solo, and Bob Iger and Alan Bergman very specifically were the ones that killed it. Now, for the very first time, we're getting a very specific calling out of Bob Iger and Alan Bergman and Disney itself in the relationship between Lucasfilm and Disney, right? So Adam Driver's being very specific here. He's like, yo, we were all on board. It's Bob Iger and Alan Bergman that said no. It's a wild thing. But anyway, let me explain to you what happened next. Basically, guys, when this happened, I, like many of you out there, got really upset. We're like, wow, this is crazy. Like, that would have at least been bold. Kylo Ren's kind of cool. Like, the sequels kind of suck, but like Kylo Ren's cool. And so I put out a statement. I said, like, hey, man, if you have any other stuff out there, like, if anybody out there knows anything about Bob Iger and maybe other times that he has done something similar to this, hit me up. Well, what ended up happening was one of my best sources ever, like a person that I trust a lot, a person that has given me a lot of very accurate information about Star Wars stuff, even very recently where I had that big video about Ahsoka Season 2, and, you know, the Mall show had that way before anybody else, and so, like, this person's very reliable. Well, this person actually sent me a laundry list of things that was going on with Bob Iger, and this person was, like, very specifically saying, like, hey, man, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, here's all the stuff that happened. So let me now take you through a list of stuff that this very, very good source told me was stuff that Kathleen Kennedy wanted, that Bob Iger killed. And then at the end of the video, we're going to have a conversation because, look, man, maybe this is your first time hearing some of this stuff. Maybe you've heard this through other sources and whatnot. But I've been sitting with this for a couple of days. I have some thoughts. I've processed it a little bit, so we'll talk about that at the end of the video. So first up, let's talk about the Clone Wars. So around the time that Disney buys Lucasfilm, the Clone Wars is sort of given an early exit. Okay, now this is pretty widely known. They kill that. They keep Clone Wars, the show, canon to the Disney stuff, but they stop it, okay? And we've seen previs on many different things that were going on in that last season of Clone Wars, including stuff with like this gigantic Kyber crystal, some flashbacks, even to Revan himself, really wild stuff that was going to be going on in that last season of Clone Wars. Well, as it turns out, it was Bob Iger that killed that. And what I was told by the source was that basically Bob Iger didn't want to have anything to do with the prequels, really. That's where this was rooted in. Which, by the way, if you go back and read the book, Bob Iger's actual book, where he's talking about George Lucas's treatments and what they wanted to do, there's this weird line where Iger says something like, George was mad, but he didn't understand the pressure we were under to deliver something that felt quintessentially Star Wars to the fans. And if you read between the lines there, what Iger's really saying is that George didn't always make stuff for the fans, at least from his perspective. And that is mainly focused on the prequels, right? It's so interesting now, because we'll come back to this way later in the video, but I just want to set this up for you because it actually does make a lot of sense that at the time of the acquisition itself, Bob Iger is literally saying, hey, we actually are not going to do this crazy ass George Lucas stuff. We want to just do Star Wars. Like, what made Star Wars when you still had it, George, when you made that crazy thing, we want to just copy pasta that into oblivion, right? That's the corpo speak. That's the corpo way of doing things. But what's important to know now is that what my source is telling me is that Kathy was fighting for Dave's show to continue. She wanted to just continue Clone Wars. Bob Iger said no, because he didn't want to glorify George Lucas Star Wars. He didn't want to glorify the prequel era stuff. Okay, so that's going to become really important. We're going to come back to that. Hold that in your thinking cap. Connected to this is a report from my source that Kathy is the one that fought really hard to bring the Clone Wars back. Again, Bob Iger did not want to do this. Bob Iger was very willing to just let Clone Wars have its sort of makeshift, shitty ending where Dave had to cut everything short and just do all that crazy stuff, right? Bob was like, no, we're cool with that. I don't want to do any more. Kathy is the one that fights tooth and nail to get that greenlit, and eventually they get it greenlit, but here's what's really interesting. Apparently, Filoni wanted to cover the Son of Dathomir story from the Dark Horse comic books, the stuff that had like Talzin, Grievous, I believe it has Dooku, and it's Maul. Very interesting little story that's technically considered canon, but it's in a Dark Horse comic book. Dave was going to adapt that in the newest season of Clone Wars when it came back, and it was going to be 16 episodes. Bob Iger said no. Bob Iger said, you have 12 episodes, and that's why we got the Clone Wars the way that it was. Next up, let's talk about the Mando and Grogu movie. From what I understand, and what my source is telling me, this is a Bob Iger idea. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, Star Wars Celebration, about 3 to 4 months before we found out about the Mando and Grogu movie, rolled out 3 different films and a plan, an actual cohesive plan on what they wanted to do with Star Wars movies. This included the Charmin Obed-Chinoy Rey movie. This included the Dave Filoni Heir to the Empire movie. We didn't know exactly what it was, but pretty sure it was going to be Heir to the Empire. And then the James Mangold Star Wars movie, which was going to tell a story like 30,000 years ago, the origin of the Force and the Jedi, right? So that was their plan. That's what they announced, Lucasfilm. That's what they announced at Star Wars Celebration. They had been planning it, cooking it, and they announced it. 3 to 4 months later, Disney, in a weird-ass press release, announces that a Mandalorian and Grogu movie is now happening, and it'll actually be the next Star Wars movie you see in theaters. Well, doesn't that seem disjointed and dysfunctional? That's because it is. That's because that movie was Bob Iger's idea. According to my source, all of the scripts for season 4 of The Mandalorian and Grogu were done. Jon Favreau wanted to just do his 4th season, but Bob Iger mandates and basically made it happen that now we're going to get this Mando and Grogu movie. Also worth noting, the 4th season of Mandalorian was going to redeem Boba Fett. They knew they messed that up and they were going to redeem Boba Fett, make him badass again. Hopefully that can still happen. Maybe it'll be in the film a little bit, although I doubt it. And then if they do end up doing that 4th season, maybe they can still do that with the Boba Fett character. But again, something cool, something they were all down with. Even Kathy was down and Iger killed it. Now, next up, we got to talk about Luke and Rey, because this is where it's going to start to get really, really weird. And a lot of you are probably not going to believe this. I am still struggling with wrapping my head around this, but I will just say that this comes from an incredibly reliable source. And I will also say that the more I sit with this, the more that it does actually make sense and track with things that we have heard. Basically, Kathleen Kennedy reportedly wanted Luke and Rey together to be the primary focus of the new trilogy. And that was something that was really important to her. But this idea was gone away from basically for 2 reasons. Number one, because Iger really, again, did not want to glorify all of the George Lucas stuff. It really does seem like Iger wanted to establish new Disney Star Wars stuff and kind of be like, thanks, George, but we can take it from here and we can make it for the fans again and get the fans excited, unlike your prequels, right? That's like the undertones that I'm picking up in the information that I'm getting. So therefore, Rian Johnson has this crazy ass idea to like subvert all of our expectations. And Bob Iger is the voice in that room that's saying, let's go with that. I actually like that. Maybe Kathleen Kennedy gets on board at some point too, and then, champions Ryan, because obviously that's something that we saw. But I'm just saying that, like, from the early days of what the trilogy was going to be conceived, when everybody was like giving their ideas, my understanding and the understanding of my source is that Kathy wanted Luke to be a really important part of all of this, which I mean, kind of makes sense. Look at what they do in the first film. You know what I mean? It's all building towards Luke. And then Ryan goes this different, crazy way. And it's just like, I think we need to reinvestigate what actually happened around that time period. It's just not as simple as like, Kathy was like, fuck Luke Skywalker, kill him. You know what I mean? That's not what happened. In fact, my source told me that Iger himself was pushing for the deaths of legacy characters, including all of the Skywalkers, because number one, it would be a really like shocking, crazy shock value thing, but also because it's the way to say goodbye to all of George's stuff and welcome in all the new Disney stuff. And again, like the more you really think about this, how is it possible that the lady that George Lucas handpicks, and we have video of Kathy saying that the most important thing in the world is to honor like George's stuff. We have the video. People have brought it up because people like to dog on Kathy for like betraying George after saying that. But isn't the Occam's razor explanation that she did want to do that? Like, isn't it actually more believable that the person George Lucas handpicked did want to continue the legacy of him? That instead the corporate controlling entity might be incentivized to go away from the original creator's stuff to solidify their own version as the new thing for Star Wars. Are you guys starting to like kind of understand where maybe I'm at with some of this stuff? Like, because this is like, oh shit. Here's a couple other things that'll blow your mind. I have heard that there was a Bane series. There was going to be a streaming service or a Disney Plus series that was going to involve Darth Bane. Bob Iger said it was too weird, too fringe. No. Kathleen Kennedy wanted to do Old Republic. She wanted to do an Old Republic trilogy. Now, this is kind of already on the record because she was, of course, cooking the stuff with Dan and Dave, the Game of Thrones people, but from what I understand, she wanted to continue doing that even without Dan and Dave. And it was Bob Iger that said no, which is so weird because it means Bob Iger said no to like Game of Thrones Star Wars, basically, because that's what like Old Republic could have been. But now he's about to say yes to Game of Thrones Marvel and Secret Wars. Man, it's just so mixed up. It's all mixed up. And here's the one that's like really the crux of it all. It's the big kahuna. It's the one that is really it's like shaking my foundations of belief here and everything that I've been thinking over the past like 8 years. Okay. So according to my source, Kathleen Kennedy really wanted to use George Lucas's treatments. Now, this is very famous. This is in Bob Iger's novel, which again, think about why he would even write about it. He would write about it to control the narrative, right? I mean, this is like it again. You really take a look at what happened before, and to me, I'm just looking at things a lot differently. Okay, but anyway, point is this: it's very well documented. Bob Iger talks about it in his book that George Lucas had treatments for his sequels, and Disney buys Star Wars, but they also buy the treatments. And Iger himself says in his own book that he knows George thought of that as a tacit agreement, which like tacit agreement or like a tacit approval is like when you're in a room with like your really good friend or like your wife and they say something and maybe it's like controversial. If you don't like correct them or whatever, it feels like you approve of it. That's what tacit approval is, right? So anyway, Iger himself says that he knows George felt as though there was tacit approval to buy that they were going to make George's stuff. And remember, George gets furious when he realizes that they weren't going to use his stuff. Okay? And what my source is literally telling me is that Kathy wanted to use George's stuff. And in fact, there was so much fighting over this that from that moment on, there's a soured relationship between Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger. From that moment on, Iger took a kind of honestly, he basically said, I'm going to now step in all your shit, is kind of the impression that I got. Basically, after that moment where he just asserts himself and sort of forces the thing where they're like, nope, we're not going to do George's stuff. There was an incredible amount of tension there between Kathy and Bob. And I want you to think about this. Think about the dysfunction of Lucasfilm for the past 5 to 8 years. Think about how much of that gets laid at Kathleen Kennedy's feet, and I'm responsible for a lot of this. I played the clips at the beginning of the video. Dude, I was really fucking mean to this lady, dude. And I really did say some horrible shit, but I also, like, more than that, genuinely believed that she ruined Star Wars. And a big part of, like, why that fucked with me so bad was that George picked her. So it always felt like this incredible betrayal. Like, the lady that George picked, handpicked to take care of his baby, just sold him out to the devil in Iger. And to be honest with you, there is sort of an extension of this conversation where we can say, well, you know what? She kind of goes along with it. Even if she didn't want it, she goes along with it. So she's still culpable in a lot of ways. And that's fair. That is fair. But I think it's also important to try to correct the record here. And I think it's also important to, like, realize, hey, guys, Kathy might not have been the Sith Lord. It might have been Iger the whole time, which, by the way, so Star Wars. The Phantom Menace hides in plain sight, right? The Phantom Menace hides in plain sight. Palpatine hid right in front of us. You know what I mean? And it's like, fuck, we never looked at the Supreme Chancellor. And some of you guys are probably, like, really mad at me because you're like, dude, we did look at the Supreme Chancellor. We've been trying to say this to you for years, et cetera, et cetera. And I get it. Best I can do is just admit that I was probably wrong and try to correct the record now, because this is crazy. And I believe my source. I truly believe that we were misled about what was going on with Star Wars. It's not as though Kathy was perfect, and I think she did plenty of stuff that messed it up. And, you know, she put her foot in her mouth, a lot of stuff publicly. But at the same time, you look at this, if this was really what happened, she deserves a lot of credit, man. She showed an incredible amount of grace, despite the walls falling down and despite, like, you know, corporate considerations and this fucking ex-weatherman, you know, wannabe president motherfucker, like, really hanging her out to dry ultimately is what it is, if this is all true. So, look, we'll talk more about this in the future. I'm looking forward to talking to my friend Star Wars Theory about this. I think we'll have a really good conversation on Nerd Theory when we break this all down. But for now, I felt it was important to get out here and put this video out, put this information out there for you on the main channel. I'm still processing this. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, as far as processing it, is I certainly feel a lot of shame. You know what I mean? Legitimately, I feel a lot of shame. There was a time, guys, where there were other folks out there that were incredibly hard on Kathleen Kennedy. And there was a time where I used to defend her a lot, right? And I used to say, like, no, it can't be. It's not that simple. I don't think she has this agenda, this, that, second, and the third. And for the longest time, I tried to be reasonable while also saying that I felt she needed to step down. And the whole idea there was, like, it started off as a base level sports analogy thinking where she's the coach of the team. They're having a losing season. In that situation, the coach steps down. Like, that's what happens. And it's for the good of the organization. And I remember I got put into a video with a lot of, like, Fandom Menace people. Maybe some of you guys remember this. And was just sort of like, it was all framed as I was this big, toxic, horrible dude that was just hating on Kathleen Kennedy. And I really wasn't then. Again, because I was trying to be reasonable. The irony at the time was many people were like, Josh showed up in a Phantom Menace video? That's crazy. Like, he's so different than those guys because he tries to be supportive and tries to have a nuanced conversation about Kathy. But here's the thing, guys. That changed for me. Many of you already know this. And this is probably why many of you got mad at me over the last couple of years or checked out on the content or just couldn't handle the way I was going, right? I was going down a path you couldn't follow. I was breaking your heart. And the truth was I got a lot more toxic because it didn't get better. And I was like, when is she going to be held accountable? Like, this was crazy. And so I really did dial it up over the last couple of years. And, you know, even I think the truth is this. The reason I did this, and I think this probably is true for many people that did this, is because we really love Star Wars and it is in such a bad place and things are so bad. And we were looking for somebody to blame. And it just really did seem like the obvious choice was the president of the company. And guys, I'm going to go as far as to say that there could have been things going on where Disney was putting information out to make it seem more like it was Kathleen Kennedy's fault. Okay, now that gets into almost like some tinfoil shit. I think this should get out there more. I think we should talk more about this, and I think we should go easier on Kathleen Kennedy. I'm doing my part to try to get this information out there. and we'll see. Maybe other people can come forward. Maybe we can get more of a sense of what's actually going on. But for my part, all I can do is try to put out the video here, as well as, you know, on the stream, Nerd Theory, and my Clips channel. I'm doing my part, you know, because God knows I talked enough shit. So let's see where the chips fall. So that's all I have for you in this video. Let me know what you're thinking about this, man. This is crazy. So let me know your thoughts. As I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.
Do you remember the first time that you met?
I can remember meeting her when I was at Warner Brothers, and she was John Milius's assistant, which was quite a job.
He was already kind of a big star.
Yeah.
Star Wars had already happened.
Had it? I don't think so.
It had happened.
Or she was always been standing right there in front of me, because I've been, you know, brooding over who am I going to get and what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? And you know, ruminating on it endlessly. And then I sort of almost immediately got up. She was in New York, I was in New York, and I just said, hey, let's go have lunch. And I popped the question, and she said yes, and I said, well, you're gonna have to divorce Frank first. But
He just changed the name of the company.
yeah.
From Kennedy Marshall to Marshall Kennedy.
Right.
Took care of that. I thought we were going to sit around and talk about how the kids were and catch up and that kind of thing. And then halfway through lunch, he said to me, you know, I've been thinking about retiring, and I don't know if you've heard or talked much about that, but he said, I'd really like you to give some thought to stepping in and taking over the company. And I was, needless to say, I was pretty stunned that that's what we were having lunch about. So I had to digest that. Then it was interesting because I answered you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I said, you know, I would be really interested in doing that. And I kind of surprised myself saying that, because there had been opportunities in my past where I could have stepped into something like this, not like this, but certainly jobs that took me outside of just the filmmaking.
You know, she knows better than I do. So, I mean, that's the best part about this, is it's not somebody who I have to explain anything to. You know, I mean, I've worked with Kathy for so many years. I mean, it is, well,
It's
at
been
least
a long
like
time.
35 years. And, you know, in close producing together, just working together, and as friends, and, you know, it's a great relationship. And it's just such a perfect fit, because she actually has all the qualities that are necessary to run a company like this.
What advice do you have for Kathy?
Good luck.